Paul. So it's a great pleasure to have Mr. Paul Nikolich today. Paul is an executive consultant and angel investor and partner at YAS.
YAS Broadband Ventures.
YAS, sorry, Broadband Ventures LLC. Mr. Nikolich develops emerging new technologies, technical standards, intellectual property, and ventures in data communications and broadband industries as an angel investor and board member of companies in the early stages of development. He's an IEEE Life Fellow and chairman of the IEEE 802 LAN Standards Committee, overseeing technical standards development for wired and wireless networking applications since 2001. Mr. Nikolich holds several patents as a BS in electrical engineering and biology and a Master of Science in biomedical engineering from Polytechnic University in Brooklyn, which is now NYU Tandon School of Engineering. Thank you all for being here today, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Francesco, and I really appreciate the invitation to come up and speak. To engage with the academic research community. Francesco and I have been in discussions for a while now. How do we increase the involvement of researchers in 802? Because traditionally, it's a very, very small fraction of our total number of participants. I would like this to be as interactive as possible. So if you have questions as I'm presenting, please feel free to put your questions in the chat box. For the people that are here in person, feel free to raise your hand and ask a question. I have a lot of slides. I'm going to cover a lot of material, but I would rather to tune the talk to what your interests are than what my slide deck shows. So once again, thanks everyone. So this is the standard disclaimer. At a lecture, these are all my views. The IEEE is not involved in the creation of these slides. They're all mine, and all these views are exclusively mine. So we already gave an introduction. So thank you, Francesco. So my intent today is to go over these high-level points, just give everyone a view of 802, what its mission is, and how we fit inside the IEEE, a little bit about the history and technical focus of 802, the markets that it served and enabled, and some of the high-level operating principles of standards development, and then to discuss what are some of the key elements of 802 projects. 802 has been a very successful standardization activity over the last 4 years, and there are a few good reasons for it. And then I use as an example the 802.11be extremely high throughput project as a demonstration of how those principles were applied. And then I'll go into a little more specific details about the process, the standardization process. And then the last part is going over what the pros and cons of engaging in standards development is. And most importantly, this last bullet is how can we, 802, engage more people from research communities? I really would like to beef up the number of people that are involved in 802 activities. You see somebody is in the chat.
No, I just
That's you.
I read the questions to you.
All right, very good. Oops. So, 802, our mission for the past 40 years has been to produce high quality, market relevant standards that are connecting the world. And we've been pretty successful at that. We've started a lot of different projects through the life of 802. We'll briefly go through some of them. And 802 is entrepreneurial in the sense, we'll start a project, maybe it'll be successful, maybe it won't be successful, but the ones that have been successful have been extremely successful. They have literally changed the world and how we connect and engage with one another nowadays. I'd like to acknowledge the fact that there are several members of the 802 community that I borrowed slides from that are on the executive committee. They're listed in this slide. So,
Probably we should hide.
I don't know, can we hide this thing?
Yeah, more. You can more.
Yeah.
Hide floating controls. Yes.
Ah, okay, good. So, there it is. So the IEEE is a very large, complicated organization. There's about 450,000 members in the IEEE. It's a professional technical society. Many of you probably are familiar with it from your student branch that operates in Northeastern University. The way it's organized is there are 5 major organizational units. There's publications, those are the journals and magazines. There's technical activities, which is the various societies and councils that have a focus on a particular field of interest. Standards Association that's responsible for oversight over the standardization process. And this is where you guys are probably most familiar, the NGA, the member and geographic activities that oversee the chapters in the various areas of the world. And then we have educational activities. The 802 LAN Standards Committee is down here, and it's basically has a dual reporting structure. It reports up to the Computer Society through the Computer Society Standards Activity Board, the Board of Governors, and then into technical activities overall. The number of societies and councils in the IEEE numbers in the 45 range. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but there's a variety of fields that it covers, from medical to transportation to power. And the Standards Association is, as I said, they provide oversight over the development of standards to make sure that when standards are being developed, you're complying with the necessary policies and procedures that will allow companies to, or individuals to gather together and develop technical standards, and not run afoul of collusion policy. So this is 802 down here, and it was formed in 1980. There's about 1,000 active members in 802. And we've got 5 working groups. I'll go into the details of this a little bit later.
Only by might.
Yes, Joseph.
So, I mean, there is a communication society. Is there no?
Exactly.
Is there no? I mean, because when I think of computer society, I think of the higher layers of the protocol stack.
Right.
When I think of physical and link layers, which is what I think about the standard, that's com society.
Yeah.
ComSoc.
So why isn't it in ComSoc? Well, because 40 years ago, when the industry got together, they had experience with Computer Society establishing standards activities in Computer Society, not in ComSoc. Back then, ComSoc wasn't interested in standards. Now they're really interested in standards. And they've come to me many times over the years, Paul, you should move over to ComSoc. You should move over to ComSoc. And I'm like, no, we are doing extremely well within the Computer Society, and we'll stay within the Computer Society. But you're absolutely right. ComSoc, from a field of interest point of view, has a lot more relevance with 802 than the Computer Society does.
And it's again, we are incredibly involved with the Communication Society. For instance, all the major conferences that we organize, share, and so on and so forth. And the communication, I'm very surprised. I'm very familiar with this structure, this slide, for instance. I saw it from you before and so on. The thing really that surprises me is that the Computer Society. Yeah. I know also that there are frictions, of course. You know, ComSoc is the big elephant in
There is friction, but they've gotten over it. I've smoothed that over, and now they're okay. Just leave us alone. And we'll collaborate. I mean, there are many ComSoc activities that are networking and physical layer related that are based on 802, and that's fine. I mean, so. But for the standards development, It's a computer society.
Okay, good to know.
So, whoops. Oh, no. Went all the way to the end. I was like, oh, smokes. So this is an attempt to depict how technology moves from research to actual products and services that we use in the world today. And this shows here's technical activities, which, as you pointed out with Comstock and other societies where the research topics are developed. There's conferences, there's journals, there's various types of publications, hundreds of thousands of participants, thousands of conferences per year. That is within technical activities. And then what happens is you start out in a society, and if you think that there's an opportunity to develop a standard within a society, you can create the necessary policies and procedures that are compliant with the standards oversight that the Standards Association provides, and take your technology, standardize it, and then bring it into industry. Actually, industry contributes significantly to the standardization process, certainly within 802, and we'll go over that. And to deliver products and services for the good of humanity. And what I try to depict here is the number of participants and standards is about 6,000, and a lot of industry contributions to those participants. Industry covers millions of potential products, and delivering products and services to billions to trillions of humans worldwide. And once again, here's a little depiction of how technical activities and standards associations collaborate. In terms of 802, we invent and author the technical standards, and the Standards Activities Board provides the oversight over how we do it. So I'm going to pause here for any questions regarding the top level flow of technology that moves from research into product and how standards play a role. I want to emphasize that in the case of 802, this path is a very well-worn path, and it indeed has resulted in billions of units being shipped per year. So many units are shipped per year. Just to give you a sense of what it's about 3 billion units just of Wi-Fi per year. That's about 150 devices per minute that are being, no, per second, 150 devices per second that are being shipped. It's an incredible success.
What were the most successful IEEE standards under 802?
The most successful ones are 802.3 Ethernet. That's the wired infrastructure that all the wireless infrastructure connects to, and 802.11, the wireless connectivity, and then 802.1, the bridging and architecture, which provides connectivity across various network domains. So those are the three principal large
15.4 is pretty close, I think.
802.15.4 is growing. That's the sensor networks, and it's getting deployed more and more robustly, but it's relative to the other successes, it's fourth.
So the fourth one.
Yeah.
Right.
So the origins of 802. This document over here, it's called a project authorization document, which is every single project that we start in 802 originates as a request for project authorization. Thought it'd be interesting for the group to see when this was formed. This initially was submitted back in August of 1979. It was approved in March of 1980. And back in March of 1980, we were supposed to have a big celebration. That was the 40th anniversary, but because of the pandemic, none of that ever happened. So it's celebration delayed. But notice this is the scope and purpose of the standard, and that original standard was to support 1 megabit data set, 1 megabit per second throughput in the local area network with a range of up to 4 kilometers. And it was going to be, back then the vision was, it was going to be a single standard. It wouldn't be all these dot groups. It'd be one standard. The industry would use that one standard, and that's all that would be necessary. The reality was, when the industry got together, they didn't agree that, okay, this is the protocol we're going to use. So we ended up with 802.3 Ethernet, carrier sense multiple access, 802.4 token bus, and 802.5 token ring. And eventually token bus and then token ring fell by the wayside. Now it's only 802.3. I get asked a lot, where does the designation 802 come from? So I thought I would dispel that myth. People think, oh, there's some special coding that was used. It's not. It's just purely administrative. When this project was proposed back in August of 1979, the next available number for our project was 802. So they had an 801, then there was an 802, then there's an 803. So that's the origin of 802. Some people say, well, the reason is 802 is the second month of 1980. That's when the first meeting actually happened, back in February 1980. No, just the next number in the line. So there was about, at that original meeting, I wasn't there, but I'm guessing there was about 50 individuals from the industry that participated in that initial gathering.
And nobody from academia.
Not that I'm aware of. The closest it came to was Bob Metcalf from Xerox, Palo Alto Research Center. He invented Ethernet, and he brought that to the group back then, but academia, no. Not that I'm aware of. I wasn't there.
Oh, you were not there?
No. No, I didn't get involved until 1989 is when I got involved. So it was about 9 years after that. The focus for 802 is interoperability. And the objective is to have interoperability at the data link and the physical layers. This is where we operate. And what we do is we connect to a variety of media. There's copper, there's fiber, there's air. There's now we're doing some optical through air optical communications. There's been some other, one was body area network where the media was the actual human body. So, but the focus is here, and our objective is to develop the specifications so that anybody that's speaking down from the network layer is able to send a packet of information, give an address, a source and destination address, and ensure that that packet of information will be transmitted down through the physical layer, through the medium, to all the possible destinations that there may be. And this has been a very successful model, and we stay very rigorously to this model.
To this day?
Yes, to this day. If something is a higher layer protocol, we will not touch it. We don't get involved in specifying the media at all. Just use whatever's available.
I mean, practically it works because, again, keeping the data link as the interface and the glue allows you to change the physical and so allowing the same technology to progress.
Absolutely, and there's a good demonstration of this 802.3. There's a slide that I have later that shows that this data link layer has been kept constant, and the number of physical layers, wireline physical layers that we currently support in 802.3 is, I don't know, I'm guessing around 50. It's really amazing to address all the various possible media that may exist out there.
For 802.3, maybe the big modification of the data link layer was when the virtual LANs needed to be implemented. Yeah, so that was done. So in the data link, we really split it up into two pieces. Yeah. You know, the MAC and the LLC, and
at this, actually at the upper layer of the NAC, we have 802.1, the bridging and architecture group has done all the VPN of the virtual LAN specification work. So here's my view of the timeline over 6 decades, how things have developed with respect to the markets and the technologies that 802 is standardized. Back in the 70s, before 802 existed, there were many different mainframe and mini computers and different proprietary networks that existed. And then everyone that was part, or not everyone, but a large percentage of the companies that were involved in these proprietary technologies realized probably it'd be better if there was a single way of connecting these computers so that we have multi-vendor interoperability, and 802 was born. And as I mentioned, the initial attempt was to develop a single standard, but it ended up that there were several different standards that were developed. Back in the 80s, the mini and personal computers came to be, and the 802.1 bridges, 802.3 wireline technologies. Back then it was coax, and 802.5 token ring were the major standards and products that were available in the market.
Which one was IBM?
IBM was token ring. The token bus I didn't put in here because the token bus, that was General Motors. They were supposed to be deploying the token bus technology for manufacturing automation, but it never did take off commercially. And what's interesting now is manufacturing automation is a major driver for the wireline work because people are automating their factories. So that was the 80s. And then in the 90s, actually at the very end of 1980s, 1989, the token, now you mentioned the token bus people, I should put it down here. The token bus people created a project called Through the Air Media. It was 802.4L was the designation of it. And they had a few companies that were interested in examining, hey, can we network things wirelessly? And there was a very small number of people that were involved. They decided to terminate the 802.4L activity, but they wanted to spin up a brand new group, 802.11. So back in 1990, we spun up 802.11 wireless LANs. And in that decade, 802.11 wireless LAN, that initial specification was developed. It took a very long time to develop that initial specification, about 7 years.
By then, the work of Marcus and others at FCC was already preparing the field for the frequencies.
Yeah, so the policy work, the unlicensed spectrum work, the groundwork was laid by Mike over here in the 70s.
From the 70s.
Yeah, it was in the 70s when he started working on trying to convince the FCC and eventually convince the FCC to set aside some spectrum from unlicensed application, which was a critical success factor for 802.11 wireless LANs. The initial wireless LANs were, initially was supposed to be optical 2.4 gigahertz only. The optical part never was developed. And interestingly enough, now we've got an optical wireless LAN project within 802. So, and it took roughly about 10 years for that work to be completed. And we started in that decade, the 802.11a project, which was the 5 gigahertz unlicensed spectrum, which was a key success factor for when 802.11 wireless LANs really became deployed in volume. And Apple was a key driver when they incorporated 802.11 wireless LANs into their laptops. So the following decade, we see tablets and smartphones numbering in the billions. We've got ubiquitous wireless, we've got mobile cellular, and faster fiber and broadband access. So 802 branched out into these markets, and it became economically feasible to introduce 802.11 technologies into the tablets and smartphones. And there was a tremendous amount of growth over that decade. The following decade, we see the Internet of Things grow up. We've got hundreds of billions of end units. They're all connected wirelessly. We've got automotive networks beginning to be more and more important in terms of the markets that we're trying to serve. And the IoT, machine to machine, we needed more bandwidth, we needed less bandwidth. Latency was an issue, power is an issue. We've got to increase the reliability. Of course, security and privacy became major drivers in those markets. And now in the decade we're in now, we've got incredible number of network devices, trillions. And of course, the privacy security is very important, and time-sensitive networking has become very important, where you're deploying networks in real-time control systems, whether they be automotive or in factories for autonomous vehicles, and then the additional bandwidth that's going to be needed to support augmented reality and virtual reality. So that's the trend that we've been on in 802.
A quick question. I just finished up a class. I teach a class on computer network to second-year students on IP version 4 and IP version 6. And of course, the motivation everybody knows is that the IP version 4 addresses were gone by 2011 and so on and so forth. And now we are talking about trillions, billions of devices being shipped every year and so on and so forth. Is there any talk about the possibility? I mean, to the 48, it's a huge space, but
exhausting the unique addresses in
the
48-bit space.
Yeah.
There has been talk, and there's been, the 802.15 group specified a 64-bit field for the MAC addresses. But the reality is that the rate of consumption of the addresses is not high enough to be concerned about it at this time.
Okay.
So at the moment, the ideas are, let's figure out, let's keep the 48-bit addresses, and maybe there's other methods by which we can utilize that address space more repeatedly.
Yes. Like the NAT.
Yeah, similar to a NAT. And then the other things that they're doing is, there's randomization of MAC addresses, concern about privacy. People can track where you are based on your MAC address. So if you randomize the MAC address, it becomes more difficult to track it. So there is talk about that, and we're actually right in the middle of updating the 802 overview and architecture document, which defines the overall architecture and the addressing scheme and the security and privacy capabilities that we should expect the foundation of 802, the other projects to be built on. So we're right in the middle of doing that. So if you're interested, Stefano, you should potentially engage in that discussion. We actually are going to have a technical plenary on the subject. I think it's December 3rd. I can forward you that information. And it's virtual, so you don't have to travel.
That's too bad.
I agree with you.
But in last question, MAC addresses, as we know, the unique address 48 bits is managed by the IEEE itself.
It is. So if you wish to produce products that are compliant with 802, you have to purchase a block of addresses from the IEEE. And IEEE acts as the registration authority for those addresses to make sure that they're unique from manufacturer to manufacturer. Okay, so now I'm going to go into a little bit of detail of how 802 is organized. So basically, there's 802.1, which is up here, which is common across all MAC PHYs. And we also have a technical advisory group, which is vertical network applications. Whereas the reason we started that, I wanted to see if I could attract industry from various vertical networks to come into 802, explain to us what are your needs, and based on what your needs are, maybe we can spin up some projects specifically to address your needs. So this has not been as successful as I was hoping for. There's only a few people that are participating. As I mentioned, there's 10 over here, but this may be an opportunity, an entry point for researchers to come into 802 and bring in some of their ideas through 802.24 into bigger 802.
Briefly describe the concept of vertical network applications.
Yeah, so so there's factory automation. That's one vertical. There's intra-vehicular networks. That's another vertical. Another vertical might be data center networks. Another vertical may be, and I've got slides in here that kind of addresses some of the verticals.
Right.
I actually maybe, not sure. Yeah, here.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Here's a slide which addresses some of the various verticals. And this is from Tim Godfrey, who's the chair of the group. He tried to break it up into two dimensions, basically range in this dimension from body area to wide area, and rate from bits per second to gigabits per second. And you can see some of the verticals here where you need on the order of hundreds of megabits per second, private wide area networks, SCADA, which is power control, voice, workforce data, drone video. For the smaller reach type applications, we've got a manufacturing, industrial automation and vehicle network. And then for the lower data rates, we've got, once again, manufacturing sensors, environmental control. You don't need a lot of data rate, but you need a lot of connectivity. And then here, once again, where you need more reach, there's energy production, drone control, smart city type applications. So these are the verticals, broadly speaking. And then, of course, it's AR, VR, XR. I didn't even know what XR is. So as I mentioned, this group's relatively small, potential entry point. We've got the overview and architecture as handled by 802.1. There's about 100 participants that are active in that. As I mentioned, we're in the midst of kicking off the revision of the overview and architecture document to where there's an opportunity to come in and provide additional refinement to the architecture to address some of these new emerging applications. And then on the wireline side, we've got the 802.3 Ethernet working group. There's about 250 people that are actively involved there. Now on the wireless side, we've got several groups, 802.11 wireless LANs. This is the biggest group that we have, about 350 people. 802.15, the one we mentioned earlier, is about 100 people. This is 802.15.4, which is sensor networking. We've got a group on coexistence, which is relatively small. And that's the mission of this group is to ensure that the wireless technologies that we developed inside of 802.15 and .11 coexist, as well as with other services that may operate in the unlicensed spectrum. And then radio regulatory is a very important part of the activity, is where we work with the various regulators across the world to help increase the amount of spectrum available for the networks that are served by 802. And then we have an appointed executive committees, vice chairs, treasurer, and I'm the chair of the group. So there's about 1,000 people have registered for the November plenary session, which is going on right now. It's going on for last week.
To know that you were coming this week, but there are so many meetings this week.
There are, but this day just happened to be a really good day for me. I only have one meeting, so this is I'm very optimistic. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to come and share my my thoughts on this. This is a slide which I took from the participants that have registered for the November plenary session. And you can see they're widely distributed. We have a lot of people in the US. Actually, it's dominated by people in North America. There's probably 450 to 500 people that are from North America. We have a pretty substantial number from Europe. And then we have another growing group from the Asia Pacific region. And we've got a pretty substantial number of people that participate from India. So this represents a tremendous example of how successful 802 has been. If you were to look at this map 30 years ago, it'd be completely concentrated in North America and Europe. There'll be almost no activity, maybe a little activity in Japan and Singapore, but it's really significantly grown. And it represents a pretty big challenge, especially in the virtual world. When you're holding a meeting, what's a good time to hold a meeting when you have people distributed across all these time zones? And from a management point of view, this has been pretty tough problem for us to address. And I'm not sure, that's why one of the reasons I want to get back to face-to-face is when you meet for a week, there's one time zone that you're in, wherever it be. And we meet in all of these time zones. We've had meetings all over the place, but then you don't have to worry about, you know, if you have a meeting at 3 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time, it's 3 a.m. in Beijing. And that doesn't work. That's one of the practical problems that we deal with on an almost daily basis. So the markets that rely on 802 standards, the traditional markets have been internet infrastructure for regional, metro, and local, data center networks, enterprise and home networks, and then the new ones we mentioned earlier, you know, growing number of client devices, especially driven by IoT, the intra and intervehicular networks, manufacturing, gaming, AR, VR. So this is the new set of markets that are driving it. And I'm sure there's going to be emerging additional markets that will occur that we don't even know yet, but trying to provide the platform for these markets to come to 802 and let us know what their requirements are. And, you know, if it makes sense, then we'll kick off a project. Cover this. This is just another cut showing how the various projects fit into that map. There's 802.11, there's 802.15.3 terahertz that Joseph's involved in. There's visible light communications. 802.22 is a project that we started. It was based on TV white spaces. It's one of the entrepreneurial activities that we kicked off back in the early 2000s. We thought TV white space would be a really good way to connect rural, low-density communities. Turns out, because of the regulatory uncertainty, this market never developed. And this technology just currently has been bypassed. So there essentially is no TV white space market. The smart utility networks, the sensor networks, 802.15.4. And then 802.15 is now kicking off ultra wideband activities. So, and we've got a couple new projects in ultra wideband as well. So,
and those are in the. So I'm trying to match the range. I never heard of the 802.15. What the range? What range is?
So now the standard from 2017 talks from anything from all the area of chip to backhaul. Wow, those are the things.
So was the question I didn't hear?
I was trying to match the ranges and the bit rate. For instance, 802.15, if I remember correctly, has to do with very small networks.
Yes, originally that was personal area networks, but now it's turned into specialty area networks.
Okay, got it.
So, yeah, so what happened is the 802.15 group sort of broke the normal mode where a group would be established every time you have a new media access control mechanism.
Yeah.
And 802.15 has multiple access control mechanisms within the group.
Bluetooth and Zigbee are very different.
Yeah, right. So when you're developing standards, we try to adhere to 5 basic principles, which are really critical to make sure that we don't run afoul of collusion or antitrust. Because when you have a standards development meeting, it's, in the case of 802, it's all individuals, it's not companies. Individuals come, they participate, they're technical experts, but the vast majority of them are sponsored by companies, they're employees of companies, and the companies compete for market. And standardization is one of the rare places where the regulators have permitted companies to come together and collaborate on developing a technology that can be shared across the entire community. But in the process of doing that, it's got to be done in a transparent and open manner. So openness is really important for standards development. Anybody that's interested in developing an 802 standard is welcome to come into 802, engage, participate, become a voter. There's no restrictions on who is going to be allowed to participate. We have due process. It's very rigorously specified how you're going to be coming, how you conclude your deliberations. And basically it's consensus driven. That means you have to get about 75% of the voting, more than 75% of the voting members to agree on a particular approach. Normally in 802, we achieve well over 90%, but it's a very well-defined process by which you achieve consensus. And if you don't achieve consensus, well, you may just terminate a project because people can't agree on a particular technique, or occasionally when you can't achieve consensus on a single technique, people will choose one or say, well, there's 2 optional ways of doing the same thing, which kind of defeats the purpose of interoperability. You really want one way the entire industry should operate in that particular technique. Occasionally we violate that with the options. Consensus.
Is the openness principle a little risky?
Well, what do you mean by risky? The answer is sometimes.
So no, my point is that you say, okay, sure, these are our activities, and we realize that right now only 1% of the participants are from academia. There might be several reasons for that. One that I see, for instance, and that has always prevented me, honestly speaking, is that, you know, as you said, it's time and resource consuming. You pay for your trips and so on and so forth. Where do we get support? We get support from research projects, and there is no proposal that you can submit to be a member of this kind of activities. The NSF, DOP, they don't give this kind of stuff. So long story short, one day a company that is interested in standardizing something comes to me and says, hey, you're from academia, I'll pay your trips so that you can fly to China, you can fly to New York, you can fly to California, whenever you want, blah, blah, blah. What for me?
Right. Well, you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
So
why I'm asking you. You guys, I say, where do I get the money? Ooh.
So, but we, as I mentioned, the vast majority of individuals are sponsored by companies, and we make it very clear when you participate in 802, you participate as an individual technical expert. Now, the reality is that you're going to be biased by your company's position, whatever your company's position may be. But we expect that the primary consideration is the technical and cost benefits of a particular approach. Your company's consideration, the reality is that it does factor into it. But as long as there isn't collusion, what I mean by collusion is where groups of companies get together and they do exactly what you said, is they tell their employees, when you go into an 802 meeting, you vote this way. If we see any remote indication of that happening, we immediately tell those, if we determine that these companies are colluding, and this did happen in the past. So, maybe you have 30 people in the room that are voters, but now you, company X, you've got 1 vote. So that's the hammer. That's the hammer that we use to keep people in line. And for the most part, people are respectful of that. But the reality is that, you know, there's bias based on the companies that you're sponsored by.
If there are a lot of people from company X, how do you avoid that? Right?
You know, the industry has multiple companies with lots of people from those different companies. Now, occasionally, if there is a company that just completely dominates an activity, then we're going to have to, and we think that it is dominating, whether it's, you know, it's preventing progress or it's forcing progress. We step in, we investigate it, we talk to the companies and say, listen, if you're telling your people how to vote, we're going to reduce your vote to your company's vote to a single vote. And we monitor that very closely. It's a really big issue because this is a highly competitive industry. There's trillions of dollars at risk. It's a very difficult thing to manage, but we've navigated it pretty well. But we've had issues in the past. We try to make sure.
But not today. People got the message.
I believe people have gotten the message. People are always pushing the limit, and we're always pushing back.
Right.
So we're in a stable state now. I think people understand. Listen, if you misbehave, we're going to take it out, and we're going to terminate it. So, but you know what happens? It's even though the companies are competitive, the individuals that are actively involved in the work, when you're working with somebody year after year after year, there's a lot of mutual respect amongst the individuals that are working on the standards. And they understand that it's the organization's objectives are more important than their company's objectives. And they tend to behave pretty well in the vast majority of cases. And people become lifelong colleagues and friends as a result of that. Balance, we make sure that on the formal voting at the end of a project, that the balloting groups include individuals from a wide range of interested parties. So it's not dominated by any one particular party. And of course, it's very important that any individual has the ability to appeal a decision. So if somebody feels that something was decided incorrectly, process wasn't followed, perhaps there was dominance, they have an opportunity to appeal that decision, and we'll go back and we'll investigate that situation. And I've been involved in a couple of appeals too. It happens. So what are some of the organizational characteristics of 802? Number one, we try to be market relevant. So people that come to 802 to propose projects typically have a reasonably high expectation that a market will develop behind this particular project that they're supporting. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. When it does work, it's tremendously successful. The performance requirements are driven by the producers and users. We produce extremely high quality documents in 802, and that's by virtue of the fact that there's what I call hyper peer review. The 802.11ax document, I think, was 1,500 pages. There were tens of thousands of comments on that document. It took many years to get to the point where it was ready to go for final balloting. And as a result of the level of peer review, the quality of the document is extremely high, so that any vendor can pick up an 802.11ax document, build their product to 802.11ax technical specifications, and it will interoperate. And we're constantly in a revision cycle too. If somebody finds something that's wrong in the document, we'll take that into consideration and revise it. We're driven by cost. The industry benefits from having low-cost products. So we try to make sure that the projects that we start have very high volume opportunity. We're dynamic and adaptive as the markets shift. We try to create new projects to address those markets. And we're collaborative. This is very important. We have close relationships with many standards development organizations, alliances, and consortia. So 802.11 wireless LAN, they cooperate with the Wi-Fi Alliance extremely closely. 802.3 with the Ethernet Alliance, and so on and so forth. And over the years, we've developed a high degree of respect across the entire industry. And we're global. You know, no matter where you go, you can turn on your laptop, except here, in my case, and you can connect to wireless LAN, whether it's in Beijing or in Boston, doesn't matter. So now I'm going to go into a little bit of a deep dive of the process. I'm running out of time. I've got up until 11:30, right?
You can go a little bit more.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, this is, I want to get to the pros and cons. So here's where the early stage technologies opportunities come in. People get together, they decide, hey, maybe there's a better implementation of the physical layer or improved, understanding of how the media operates or what the access control efficiency could be improved. We encourage them to come into 802 as soon as possible. And we do this through, right now, it's fractured. We have wireless next generation groups in 802.11, 802.15. We have other next generation activities in 802.1 and 802.3. And this is where Francesco has been helping me out. How can we get a broader reach for the early stage technologists such as yourself to come in and bring some of these new ideas that are going to be relevant to the markets 802 wants to serve in the long run, say in the 3 to 7 year time frame. If there's sufficient interest, we'll start a study group, and the study group will then produce a project request. And the executive committee will review the project request. If it meets a certain set of criteria that I'll discuss a little bit later, we'll kick off a project, we'll develop a draft standard, go through Standards Association ballot, and then finally the Standards Association has final approval as to whether or not to publish that standard. And then that published standard is revised constantly in the case of 802 because there's always new work coming in. I don't want to dwell on this process too much because it's kind of in the weeds. But the important elements of a standards project in 802 is to define the technical objectives of the standard, define how it will be used, define the market drivers for the standard. And we like people to come in with very crisp definitions of these 3 top points. And the way we articulate that to the individuals is we've developed another set of criteria for standards development. Show us how there's broad market potential. Are you going to have multiple vendors? You're going to have numerous users. What's the technical feasibility? How far out is the technology that you're proposing from commercial deployment? Is it based on prototypes or it's all simulations? We want to know that there's a market for it and that there's known cost factors for the technology that's being proposed. Distinct identity. We don't want to duplicate work that's being done by other groups. We want to make sure that it's backwards compatible. We want to make sure from a wireless point of view that wireless projects will coexist with one another and that the projects are manageable. And we carefully review these criteria when we're assessing whether or not to approve a project. And it's also critical to have a large enough core group of volunteers to actually do the work that and it's a lot of work. I mean, it's potentially, depending on the size of the project, could be 5 years worth of effort. And this is an example I use in 802.11 EE, extremely high throughput wireless LAN, the scope. going for a maximum throughput of 30 gigabits per second, operation between 1 and 7.25 gigahertz, and it's got to be backwards compatible and coexist with legacy devices. From a purpose point of view, we want to provide wireless connectivity for fixed, portable, and moving stations. And the need, some of the drivers behind it, video traffic, virtual reality, gaming, all of these things that are driving the need for a project are defined. And there's a set of approximately 200 people that are standing ready to do the work. When we reviewed this, we approved this a couple of years ago, and the project's right in the middle of development right now. Here's a timeline that was developed back in 2019, but it shows you that TGBE is expected to be ratified in 2024. We approved it in 2019, so we're looking at a 5-year time horizon to get the project done. And where we're at now is we're right in the middle of draft development. So it's a very long-term commitment. And this is an issue for researchers. I was talking to Stefano, being able to be engaged for this period of time at an intense level is just simply not practical. So the question I want to put to the group is, well, how do we engage researchers in a way that is going to be attractive to them, despite the fact that projects take so long? Can you contribute at some level, somehow, that will be beneficial to you and to the 802 community? How do we get the work done? The executive committee reviews projects. They approve it. We kick it off. This is where a lot of expenses occurred. We have 3 week-long plenary sessions and 3 week-long interim sessions that when they're face-to-face, there's a fair expense in travel and lodging, and also the fact that you're taking these employees offline from their day-to-day jobs. So that's a pretty significant investment that needs to be made. And then in between the face-to-face meetings, when we do have them, there's a never-ending barrage of virtual meetings that consumes a huge amount of time. So if you're engaged, and many people engaged in 802, their entire full-time job is to provide support for developing drafts. And the drafts are developed, and then ultimately we oversee the work in progress, make sure there isn't dominance occurring, and we'll approve completed projects for standard board ratification. And this is an example of a plenary session. This is the plenary session that we're having right now. It started back on the 5th of November, going through the 19th. There are several executive committee meetings, and each of the working groups splits up into their own particular working group sessions. And this is a typical plenary session in the virtual domain. When we're in person, this is all shrunk down into a Monday to Friday timeframe, but it's impossible to do it virtually. So that's one of the reasons I'm trying real hard to get us back into face-to-face meetings, is to get people together and reduce the amount of time that we're in plenary sessions, focus the activities, and also encourage innovation, which is not occurring right now in the virtual domain. These documents are very large, complex documents. I just put this down as an example of the page count of these documents. 802.1, over 5,000 pages. The Ethernet, over 8,300 pages. Wireless LAN, over 6,000. And so on and so forth. I mean, we've got almost 28,000 pages of technical specifications. They're very detailed. They have to be detailed in order to support the markets that we're developing, so that interoperability can be achieved. And what happens is there's a base standard, like the 802.3 Ethernet standard. There's a base standard, then let's stick with the wireless LAN. There's a base standard that's 6,000 pages long. 11BE might be 1,000 pages. that'll amend the base 802.11. So here's my thoughts on the pros and cons of engaging in standards activities. Pros, it's a mass market enabler. So if you're engaged in developing 802 standards and you have a particular market that you're trying to develop, if you get it into an 802 standard, there's a good chance it'll result in a mass market. There's no guarantee. It takes a very long time, those standards, to get out. There's economies of scale and competition because it produces interoperable product. There's lots of competition, therefore the cost of product goes down, therefore the scale, the number of units are increased dramatically. But in order to get that economy of scale, we have complex specifications. It's innovative. Industry does bring innovative new ideas into 802 constantly. And when we're meeting face to face, this happens on a regular basis. We're very responsive to the marketplace, but it is highly competitive. There's no guarantee that if you bring a new idea into 802, that idea is going to be endorsed and adopted into a standard. It supports a global marketplace, but you have to satisfy many regulatory domains. You got potential intellectual property license revenue, but you've got to make it available on a free, reasonable, and non-discriminatory basis. But in order to get that, you need to achieve broad consensus, which is a challenge. We see a lot of collaborative teamwork inside of 802, but some people are, and I'm talking about individuals, are extremely competitive. And that's a good and a bad thing. Competition is good up to a point, but when it starts getting nasty, that's not good. And that happens occasionally. We're evolutionary. Because we're evolutionary, we're resistant to brand new concepts, like what I'm trying to do with Francesco. The executive committee's like, "Oh, what the hell are you trying to do?" And I'm like, "I'm trying to get more innovative people into the mix here. Let's engage the researchers with the 802 community and let them, 802 community benefit from their knowledge and the research to benefit from where 802 is going." It's a great place to develop expert resources, but the negative is there's a long, steep learning curve. We have well-defined operating policies, but they're very arcane, and training and mentorship is required. And we're fully transparent and open, but when you come into 802, you must be willing to share some really core, important information that may be relevant to your business. So that's my take. And here, maybe I can end it here. So what am I trying to do? And why I'm here, and I really appreciate the support that Francesco's giving me, is traditionally academic and industrial researchers are less than 1% of the participants in 802. I want to increase the number of people that are from your community in 802. I think it'll be good for your community. It'll be good for 802's community. I'm here to, get some advice from you guys. How can we bridge this gap? Yes, I know it's expensive. Yes, I know it takes a long time. But, are there things that we can do in 802 that make it sufficiently attractive to your community that we can mix the two of them together better than we currently have? So with that, I'll terminate the talk. So thank you very much. And, I'm really very interested for everybody that's out there in virtual land, as well as in the room, please reach out to me and let me know if you have some ideas on how we can engage you in a more